I will. Good morning, everyone, and happy Easter. I guess it was a pretty happy day that day, long ago as well, if we view it that way. Today, I want to do a little bit different kind of talk about this time that we call Easter. I've done many of these talks in the past, and as I was listening to the gentleman speak about Easter of all these different things. I rise, I rise, I rise. That's sort of the talks that I've given before, of where take this time and resurrect. I've heard Joel Osteen, a little commercial on the radio about him, where he's saying you have this resurrection power within you and so forth, and I thought, well, what if you're like me and you don't believe in the resurrection? Because I don't. I'll be quite honest with you. As time has passed, I've given up that notion. And the reason I've given up that notion basically is because of what I have read and studied in Scripture. Let's take the synoptic Gospels, for instance, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Mark came first, and it's the shortest of all the gospel messages, the good news. It speaks of Jesus. It doesn't mention his birth. It doesn't mention anything about that. It just starts off with him going to the river and being baptized by his cousin, John, who was later called John the Baptist, because that's what he was doing, is he was helping people, in a sense, resurrect it within their lifetime, to be born again by going under the water, coming back out of the water, being cleansed of all that had been. And this was his message and his symbology that he used to help people get past where they had been or were in life, and to rise again out of the water. Jesus thought it was such an important message that he did it himself. He went to his cousin and was baptized in the water. I was going to say in the Jordan, but I'm not sure if we even know what water it really was. It was just, that's what happened. That's what John was doing. A lot of people followed John. John was done away with, his body and so forth. And after he was gone, and it was a great shock to all the followers of John, a great shock. But they considered him gone, and they looked for another to follow. Many of them turned to his cousin. As the scriptures tell us, they were cousins, and they turned to him and they followed him. The message of Mark is that after this baptism, he went out and started his ministry, and that he was about 30 years old when this happened. He began this ministry, and Mark's message to everyone is that this message that he had was to awaken, repent, which means turn away from the way you have viewed things, and turn to a new way of viewing things. There's nothing about rising again there. There's just turn away from the way you've done things in the past and have a new way of looking at life and a new way of expressing life. Well, then he goes through, and the thing that is really noticeable about Mark's message to everyone is that it's not really trying to be historical, in the sense that it's trying to put together a way in a story form of the sayings that he or others remembered. You got to remember that Mark probably wasn't a follower during the time of Jesus, or he could have been, but he'd be pretty old by then because his message wasn't written down to be followed until maybe the year 60 or 65 CE, current era. All right, so if Jesus was 30, 33, somewhere in that range, and it didn't happen, then it happened about 30 years after Jesus was even on the earth, in that sense. And it's all written down, and it goes all the way through to the time of his demise, his crucifixion by the Romans, by the way. And he mentions that he was carried to a tomb, and that after 3 days the tomb was found empty. And that's where it ends. It doesn't say anything about him appearing again or anything. It just leaves it a mystery. That's the original Gospel of Mark. Well, then later, quite a bit later, there comes another message, a message with much more meat and body in it. And it starts off with a lineage of where Jesus came forth, and it goes all the way through that. And this is the message of Matthew. Then and this message goes all the way through, and I'm going to shorten it as much as possible. It goes through, and it has a lot of these sayings, these teachings, the same ones, and then it goes through there and a few others that were included. And when it's all said and done, then it goes to the time of the supposed resurrection, and it mentions that he is seen after the fact. After the tomb has been found empty, he is seen. He is physically seen, visibly seen. Then the last one that comes along, of the synoptic gospels, and synoptic only means that they're seen together. They're all seen from the same perspective. Then the last one that comes along after that, after it should be Mark, Matthew, then comes along Luke. Luke is much later. He comes along around 90 CE. He's supposed to be a doctor and a friend, and he's also the person who is supposed to have written the book that we call the Acts, A-C-T-S, Acts of the Apostles. Little histories there that he's giving of what happened after all this took place. Now notice that all three of these, and also John, which we'll discuss just in a moment, all three of these are written in third person. They're not written in first person. They weren't there. At least they don't write in that way. They don't say, I saw or I heard. They say, he said, or he delivered this message. It never mentions anything in first or second person. It's always in third person. All three of them are that way. John also is that way, but John comes much later. Now, one thing I want to mention is that if you're like me and you grew up, you heard or were taught that these people knew Jesus and that they were there with him. I know that that sort of is a difficult thing to imagine when you hear the story of Jesus being tried or interviewed or questioned in the Gospels by the Romans. This happens as though there was somebody right outside the window with a tablet writing all this stuff down. And that's sort of the way as a child or as a young teenager and so forth, or a young man, I pictured it that way. I pictured that there was somebody there recording all of this, or somebody who had heard somebody else say, I was there and this is what I heard. I was just right outside. We know that just can't be. That cannot be. That is part of the way the stories were first told and then written down. Now you've got to keep in mind that if you or I or anyone else were telling a story to someone else, they would hear the story and then they would go out and tell the story, and they might embellish it a little bit, leave things out, change the wording slightly, because that's just simply the way the human mind does things. It does things to be able to keep or capture its audience. You must remember that these Gospels, now this is one of the things I was taught in ministerial school, these were like comic books, these Gospels. They were written in such a way that they made a highly or deep impression upon the mind and the psyche of the listener. So if there needs to be a miracle or two thrown in there to give you that feeling of excitement or believability, so be it. If there needs to be a Lazarus being risen from the dead, so be it. You know, one of our presidents, I guess he's our third president, Thomas Jefferson, he didn't believe in any of the miracles and wrote his own Bible. I've got a copy of it somewhere, the Jefferson Bible, in which all of the so-called miracles of Jesus are eliminated. And he thought that was a much better read because it didn't go off into, as he called it, the fanciful stories about Jesus. Well, to me, in my mind, the idea of the resurrection, which did not appear in the first gospel, it simply talks about an empty tomb. You know, this could have happened in many, many ways. I think we have to be very conscious of the plausibility that if there were an empty tomb, it meant that the body was missing. Period. Not that there was a resurrection. And as I have said in talks before, the idea of a resurrected body coming out of a tomb and walking around is a bit zombie-like, and it's creepy. And I don't necessarily want to follow that idea. I want to follow an idea that the message stayed with us and stayed with his followers. But to gain other followers, especially in this time, this Hellenistic time, this time between the Greek and Roman periods, which also included Palestinian periods, all of this time that was being that they were living in at that time, they had stories of gods or demigods that they worshipped or followed closely. One of them being Hercules. There was a great Heraclean movement in those times, that being Greek. There was Apollo, which was Roman. There were many other gods, goddesses, demigods that they followed at that time. And so some of the questions they would ask of the followers of Jesus who came to tell them about this miraculous story of him being captured, tortured, finally killed on a cross, laid in a tomb. The tomb is empty. And then, is that the end of the story? Well, his listeners who were Greek or Roman would say, well, you know, we've got people that are better than that. They appeared again. And the person telling the story would say, oh yeah, well, that's what happened here too. He appeared again. Oh, did he now? Okay, now it's more believable. Now I can tell that he was more like a spiritual leader, if you include something like that. Or going back and saying, well, yeah, what about his birth? Tell us about that. And oh yeah, he was born. His mother was a virgin, just like you're speaking of when you talk about Hercules and his mother. And yeah, he was like that. It's easy to just add and employ these stories on top of this and get it to the point where it's acceptable to the people of his time. And as they were more acceptable, then they were more amenable to the idea that he and his teachings were extremely important, were right, and could change the world. Now, a lot of that's just my belief. Just me, just little old me. That's the way I'm picturing it. I don't want to take anything away from it. If anything, I want to add something to it. So how can I do that? How can I add something to this? And it is that the importance of Jesus, this minister from Galilee, and all of his teachings, the importance is that these teachings must be fulfilled within us. You know, he is reported in the Gospels to have said, "These things that I do, you will do also, and even greater things will you do." Now, my first impression of all that is he was saying, I can do miracles, and you too will do miracles and even greater miracles. And I believed that for a long time in my life. What I didn't understand, that he wasn't talking about miracles, because those miracles may have never really happened. What was important, and is important to us in our lives, is the teachings. These teachings that I give to you, these ideas which will expand and spread your consciousness that I tell you about, you will do these also. You will accept them and use them, and even greater things will you do. Now, what were his teachings? His teachings were to heal the sick, give to the poor, give to widows and orphans, and to do everything in your life to be as peaceful and loving as you can. Focus your attention on spirit within, whether you call it Abba, the Father, or whether you call it Allah or Elia, whatever you may call it. You picture something greater than your physical self and your physical mind. You picture it greater than that, and that you give great attention to it at all times in your life. At all times. Not just when you want to, not just on a Sunday, not just when you go into meditation or prayer, not then, all times. Love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, there's a writer named Bart Ehrman. He has recently released a book, and he doesn't say, love your neighbor as yourself. He's in his book is titled, Love Your Stranger. I like that idea. Love your stranger as yourself. Because you know the parable that Jesus is reportedly to have taught about the Good Samaritan is that people who were known by the person that had been attacked and left wounded and hurt and robbed on the side of the road, they walked right on by him. But the person that came to his aid was one of those filthy strangers who they called Samaritans from Samaria. What was their great crime? That they became the enemy of the Jews at that time? They still worshiped on a mountain. They still saw God in the tree. They saw things in a different way, an old way that they thought, I've forgotten that way. I don't want to worship that way, and anybody that does is a fool. Anybody that does is outside of what we believe, and therefore is not important. We stay away from them. And Jesus asked at the end of that parable, so who was his neighbor? And the answer is, well, the Samaritan. He says, well, picture that and go and do the same kind of thing in your life to others. The stranger. Love your stranger. I love that idea. Love those who you cannot picture in your life being a part of your group, but rather apart from your group. So they're not necessarily your neighbors, because that's easy. That's easy to love your neighbors. It's easy to love your kin. It's very easy. Well, it depends on your kin, I guess, but it's easy to love them. Very easy. But what is not so easy is to love the one outside of your group that you have considered a part of. Love outside that. Now, we're living in a world right now, and we've pretty much always lived in a world like this, where we have those that are a part of our group, a part of those who we understand and care for, and there are those who we don't care for, and they're outside of our group. Jesus' message is love them all. Love everyone all the time. Oh, that's so difficult to do. But if we start doing that, then we are doing exactly as we are supposed to do according to the master teacher. You may follow other master teachers, and that's fine. But what you will do, even in following other master teachers, you will follow this message, which is get along with everybody. Get in a place in your life where you no longer see an us and a them. Get a place in your life where you are changed in a deep level. To me, that is a greater message today than it is to give some kind of supernatural idea of a man who lived, died, and 3 days later came back to life. Picture this too. What happened later? If it's true, if it's a true story, is he still alive? Did he ever die again? Did he go off someplace else and just keep on living? Did he never age beyond 33? What would be the kind of life that a person like that would live? It's more important for us to say, he didn't die because he lives within me. And what lives within me is not this idea of resurrection, it's this idea of inclusion. The idea that we must include all, and we must see all as one life, one presence, one power, one mistake, one non-mistake. We must see all of this together. The idea that what we're supposed to do in order to be born again is to change our minds, repent, turn our face away from necessarily believing only in things we see in the world, in the outer, and give more importance to that which we see, feel, and experience in the inner. That's much more important, I think. At least it is to me. That's the message that I can hang on to, that I can grab hold of, something I can sink my teeth into and say, yes, that's what I want to do with my life. What I want to do is to be able to love everyone and seek happiness and fulfillment for everyone. You know, there's just too much suffering in the world. Way too much suffering in the world. We are the only ones who can make a difference in that suffering. And we can't necessarily make a difference if we look at it as such a large, large problem and not being able to tackle it. And we just give up and say, it's too big for me. I'm just one person. Yes, but that's what the song Let There Be Peace on Earth is trying to teach us. Let it begin. Let it start unfolding. Not as though I am the only one working on this problem, but that I am one of the many, that I'm a one of the all who is working on this problem. Being able to see one another in such a way, that we include all, even the ones we don't like or the ones we don't know. Include them all. The only way we can do this is to look within ourselves and say, what is it I don't like there? Can I accept that? Can I embrace that? What is it within me that I don't know, that I'm not aware of? Can I accept that and embrace that? Can I bring myself together into a place where I am the all? That's what Jesus was asking us to do. That's why he said, greater things that I do, you can do. Not doing miracles, not walking on water, not making water into wine, not any of those kind of things. Just put all those things aside. Just say that's embellishments of a story. And look in the moment now and say to yourself, what am I capable of doing in the situation I'm in the situation my consciousness is in? What am I capable of doing? First, let us clean house within. First, let us accept ourselves as we are in the now moment within. Then once we have accepted ourselves, then yes, this will change from moment to moment. This will always change within us because that's the nature of being a human living being. But we can go beyond that and make those moments become closer and closer and closer together. You know, there are two types of electricity that were put together and used. All of you know this story. There was direct current, which is all the electrons going from one place to another in a circle, and then that circle continuing on and on and on. Or there is the way that Tesla pictured it and made it possible, which is alternating current. And that means that the electrons within a wire or whatever the medium might be can go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this motion of going back and forth, that's what we have. You know, we use the term 60 cycles, 60 cycles. Okay, we're using those cycles, and those cycles are not one cycle going all the way around from one end to the other, because friction will cause it to be less voltage at the end of that journey through that wire. And in Tesla's way of doing it, there is no change. It just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they just move one another. Da, 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 da. And as they are moving one another, they start moving the ones next to it, and moving the ones next to that, and moving the next ones all the way to the very end, and then starting over within this generator, this alternating generator that Tesla invented, saw in his mind first before he ever tried to put one together. Why am I going off there? And does it seem like I'm going off on a tangent? No, and here's why. That's the way we can get where we want to be. To change our idea of saying, I'm starting here in this lowly state, and somehow I'm just going to raise up my power, and I'm going to go all the way to the very end, and then I'm going to cycle that back and forth. If we do that, we're going to meet obstacles along the way. We are going to meet friction. We are going to meet ways which just deplete us in so many ways. But if we see the idea within ourselves much more like the alternating way, we will say, I'm there, I'm there, I'm there, I'm there, and we will never be falling all the way back. We will always be moving, moving, moving within ourselves, creating a spiritual energy within ourselves which is everlasting. And greater things will you do than I do, said he. Follow the master. Follow the one who gives you these ideas, whether it be Jesus, whether it be Lao Tzu, whether it be who, you name it, anyone who is expressing the truth of being, the real truth of being. How many times in how many different religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, is the idea of the golden rule? Love your neighbor as yourself. They're all in there. Why? Because these people were able to resonate this idea within themselves and then use it. Use it in such a way that it became useful to the world in the outer. Being able to do that gives us a feeling of power that we never, ever will be able to achieve in the outer. It will be able to move ourselves, change ourselves. I don't like the idea of resurrect ourselves because there's nothing that's ever come to a complete stop. The idea is involve yourself in the world, in the outer, by looking in a more deep level and seeing things that you may have never really viewed and seen before. I'm beginning in my life to see more and more people who need what I have. It's not physical, it's a consciousness. They need this. I can help them achieve that, not by going out and telling them what they ought to be doing, but rather loving them, accepting them, and pulling them within the circle of love. Happy Easter, everyone. God bless.
Wow. Thank you, Terry, for this Easter message and for sharing your truth. And I just asked the group, would you like me to stop the recording now, or you want to record it for those who haven't been able to be with us and get your comments? For those that want to stop the recording, raise your hand. Okay, so be it.